Imani Brooks has exactly one sandwich to last her the next 18 hours, and her stomach is already aching. She's walking past Webster Park, gripping it tightly in her bag, reminding herself she can't afford to give any of it away today. Then she sees him, the same elderly man sitting on the bench, completely still, like he's been waiting there longer than anyone should. He doesn't ask for help, doesn't even look up, just sits there, quiet and alone in a way that feels heavier than hunger. Imani keeps walking. She has to. That sandwich is everything right now. But something about him pulls at her, stronger than the ache in her stomach. She stops, turns. Her hand tightens around the sandwich before she slowly pulls it out and holds it toward him. He finally looks up, and his eyes lock onto hers. And in that moment, something shifts. What Imani doesn't realize is this single choice is about to change everything. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Through the thin curtains of their small apartment, early morning light filtered in, casting soft shadows across the worn linoleum countertop. Imani Brooks stood in the kitchen, carefully dividing a single sandwich into two equal halves. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as she wrapped each portion in a paper napkin before tucking them into her weathered backpack. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the aging refrigerator. Her mother, Laverne, had already left for her first shift at the diner. A hastily scribbled note sat on the counter. "Have a good day, baby. Don't forget your homework. Love you. Mom." Imani smiled, touching the paper gently before folding it and slipping it into her pocket. Breakfast was a simple affair: tap water in a plastic cup and a single piece of slightly burnt toast. Imani ate slowly, making each bite last while reviewing her biology notes. The textbook before her was secondhand, its pages dog-eared and highlighted by previous students, but she treated it like a treasure. Every word brought her one step closer to her dream of becoming a nurse. After washing her cup and plate, Imani double-checked her backpack. Homework, notebooks, the carefully divided sandwich, and her prized possession: a medical terminology study guide she'd found at a thrift store for 50 cents. The cover was torn, but the knowledge inside was intact. The morning air was crisp as she locked the apartment door behind her. Their neighborhood wasn't the prettiest. Paint peeled from buildings, and chain-link fences lined cracked sidewalks. But Imani had learned to find beauty in small things. The determined dandelions pushing through concrete, the melody of birds nesting in streetlights, the morning sun warming her face. Halfway to school, she spotted a younger student ahead of her, struggling with an armload of papers that suddenly scattered across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Imani jogged forward to help. "Here, let me help you with those," she said, already kneeling to gather the wind-blown sheets. The younger girl looked close to tears. "Thanks. My science project is due today, and I can't let these get dirty." "I've got you," Imani assured her, carefully arranging the papers in order. She noticed they were about the human circulatory system, a topic she knew well. "The heart diagram looks great," she added, earning a small smile from the girl. At school, Imani headed straight to the library. Jason, a sophomore struggling with algebra, was already waiting at their usual table. He couldn't afford a tutor, but that didn't matter to Imani. "I still don't get these word problems," he sighed, pushing his homework across the table. "Let's break it down step by step," Imani replied, pulling out a scratch paper. She could have used the extra money from tutoring, but something in her wouldn't let her charge someone who needed help. Her mother always said that kindness comes back around, even if you can't see how. During lunch period, the cafeteria buzzed with activity. Imani sat at her usual corner table, removing half of her sandwich. Her stomach growled softly, but she ignored it, wrapping the second half back up carefully. A few tables over, Students traded snacks and shared pizzas from the cafeteria line, luxuries she rarely experienced. "Want to split my chips?" her friend Maria offered, noticing Imani's meager lunch. "I'm good, thanks," Imani smiled, taking small bites to make her portion last. She didn't explain why she only ate half her lunch these days. Some things were easier left unsaid. After the final bell, Imani took her usual route home through Webster Park. The small green space wasn't much. A few benches, some patchy grass, and trees that had seen better days, but it offered a quiet moment between school and home. That's when she saw him again. The elderly man sat alone on the third bench, the same spot as yesterday and the day before. His clothes were clean but well worn, his posture straight despite his age. He wasn't obviously homeless. There was a dignity about him that suggested otherwise, but something in his eyes spoke of deep loneliness. Arthur Hale, though Imani didn't know his name yet, stared ahead with quiet emptiness. His hands rested still on his lap, and his face carried an expression of someone lost in memories or regrets. He seemed separate from the world around him, as if sitting in a bubble of solitude that no one dared to breach. The remaining half of Imani's sandwich felt heavy in her backpack. Her own stomach reminded her that she was still hungry, that she could easily justify walking past him again. But there was something about his stillness, about the way he seemed to have been forgotten by the world, that made her pause. She stood there for a moment, watching as other park visitors walked past him without a glance, too busy with their phones or conversations to notice the quiet man on the bench. A businessman hurried by, briefcase swinging. A couple passed, lost in their own world. A mother steered her children toward the small playground, eyes ahead. The man remained motionless, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. His isolation seemed almost physical, like a visible weight pressing down on his shoulders. In that moment, he reminded Imani of the way her mother sometimes looked after a double shift, present in body, but somewhere far away in spirit. Imani's fingers tightened around her backpack strap as she stood frozen mid-step. The half-sandwich seemed to gain weight with each passing moment, pulling at her conscience like an anchor. Her own hunger gnawed at her stomach. She'd been careful with lunch, taking tiny bites, but it hadn't been enough. This remaining half needed to last until tomorrow. The elderly man hadn't moved, his weathered hands folded neatly in his lap. There was something about his posture that spoke of better days. His back remained straight despite his age, his clothes clean though obviously worn. He wasn't slouched or disheveled like the homeless men who sometimes passed through the park. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made his isolation seem even more profound. A young couple walked past him, laughing at something on their phones. Neither spared him a glance. A mother hustled her children along the path, eyes carefully avoiding the bench. A jogger adjusted his route to sweep wide around the seated figure, as if loneliness might be contagious. Imani shifted her weight from one foot to the other, arguing with herself. The responsible thing would be to walk away. She had her own struggles, her own empty cupboards at home. Her mother worked so hard for every dollar. Wasn't it disrespectful to give away even this small portion of what they could afford? But something in his stillness reached past all her practical arguments. He reminded her of the library books she found sometimes, forgotten on shelves, their stories waiting years to be read. There was history in his face, wisdom in the lines around his eyes, and a deep sadness that made her chest ache. "Just keep walking," she whispered to herself. "You can't help everyone." Her feet, however, had other ideas. Before she could stop herself, they carried her toward the bench. Each step felt simultaneously right and terrifying. The man didn't look up as she approached, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. Imani cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned slowly, his blue eyes focusing on her with surprising sharpness. Up close, she could see the fine quality of his shirt beneath the wear, the careful way his white hair was combed. There was nothing unkempt about him, just an overwhelming sense of someone who had stepped out of the world's flow. Yes? His voice was quiet, but clear, carrying the refinement of someone used to being listened to. Imani's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her backpack. I was wondering if you'd like half of my sandwich. The words came out in a rush, and she immediately felt foolish. What if she was insulting him? What if he thought she was treating him like a charity case? The man studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That's very kind, he said finally. But surely you need it yourself. The question caught her off guard. Most people would simply accept or decline, not worry about her needs. I had the other half at lunch, she said, which was true even if it hadn't been enough. It's nothing special, just peanut butter and jelly. But it's fresh. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. He hesitated, then slowly extended his hand. Thank you. I would be grateful to accept. His fingers were steady as he took the offered sandwich half, his nails clean and trimmed. He handled the simple meal as if it were something precious, carefully unwrapping the napkin. I'm Imani, she said, then immediately wondered why she'd introduced herself. The man nodded politely but didn't offer his own name. Thank you, Imani, he said again, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that made her blush. It's been a long time since anyone has shown such kindness. She shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to the rawness in his tone. It's just a sandwich, she mumbled. Is it? His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Imani took a step back, suddenly overwhelmed. I should get home. My mom will be wondering where I am. He nodded, returning his gaze to the distance. Of course. Don't let me keep you. Imani turned and walked away quickly, her empty backpack feeling lighter, but her heart strangely heavy. Behind her, she resisted the urge to look back, to see if he was eating the sandwich, or if he'd thrown it away. Something told her she didn't want to know. The rest of her walk home was a blur of mixed emotions. Pride warred with uncertainty, generosity with practicality. Her stomach growled loudly, and she picked up her pace. In their small apartment, Imani dropped her backpack by the door and headed straight to the kitchen. Her mother wouldn't be home for hours yet, still working her second shift at the diner. The refrigerator hummed emptily, its contents limited to condiments and half a carton of milk they were stretching to last the week. Imani filled a glass with tap water and drank it slowly, trying to fool her stomach into feeling full. She could have told her mother about the sandwich, about the mysterious man in the park. Her mom would understand. She was always helping others herself, even when they could barely make ends meet. But something kept her quiet. Maybe it was the man's dignity, or the private nature of their interaction. Maybe it was the way his thanks had touched something deep inside her. Whatever the reason, Imani decided this would be her secret, at least for now. She refilled her water glass and carried it to the small desk in her room, pulling out her homework. The hunger would pass, she told herself. Some things were worth a little sacrifice. The morning sun filtered through the faded curtains of Imani's small kitchen as she stood at the counter, carefully slicing a fresh sandwich into 2 equal halves. Her movements were more deliberate today, less hesitant than yesterday. The peanut butter spread a little thinner, making sure there would be enough for tomorrow's lunch, too. Her mother had already left for her morning shift at the diner, leaving behind the familiar scent of coffee and a hastily scrawled note. Have a good day, baby. Love you. Imani tucked the note into her pocket, a small comfort to carry through the day. Her stomach rumbled as she wrapped each sandwich half separately. The hunger from yesterday had lingered through the night, making sleep restless. Still, she packed both portions into her backpack without second-guessing her decision. The walk to school felt longer today, her steps a little heavier. Near the school entrance, she spotted Tommy Martinez struggling with an armful of art supplies, papers threatening to scatter in the morning breeze. "Here, let me help," Imani offered, catching a wayward sketch before it could escape. Despite her own fatigue, she helped him gather his materials and carry them to the art room. "Thanks, Imani," Tommy said, relief evident in his voice. "You're always helping everyone out." She shrugged, managing a smile. "It's nothing." But the simple act of kindness had lifted her spirits slightly. First period was English, usually one of her favorite subjects. Today, however, the words seemed to swim on the page as her empty stomach distracted her. Sarah Wilson, sitting next to her, looked confused by the Shakespeare passage they were studying. "Want me to explain it?" Imani whispered, pushing aside her own discomfort. For the next few minutes, she quietly broke down the complex language into simpler terms, watching understanding dawn on Sarah's face. By lunchtime, the hunger had become a constant companion. Imani sat in her usual spot in the cafeteria, away from the main crowd. The half sandwich looked small on the table in front of her. She ate slowly, making each bite last, trying not to think about the other half in her backpack. Jessica Palmer stopped by her table, asking for help with biology homework. Despite her growing headache, Imani spent 20 minutes explaining cell division, drawing diagrams on a spare notebook page. The time spent helping others made her own hunger feel less important somehow. When the final bell rang, Imani gathered her things quickly. The familiar path through the park seemed shorter today, anticipation replacing yesterday's uncertainty. She spotted him right away, Arthur sitting on the same bench, in the same position, his gaze distant, but somehow more aware of his surroundings. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her footsteps were steady as she approached the bench, already reaching into her backpack for the wrapped sandwich half. "Good afternoon," she said softly. Arthur turned to look at her, and something in his eyes suggested he'd been hoping she would return. "Good afternoon, Imani." She held out the sandwich half, noticing how his hands were clasped loosely in his lap, just like yesterday. "Would you like to share my lunch again?" He accepted it with the same careful grace as before. "Thank you. How was school today?" The question surprised her. It was more personal than their brief exchange yesterday. Imani shifted her weight, considering how much to share. "It was okay? We're reading Shakespeare in English class." "Which play?" His voice carried genuine interest. "Romeo and Juliet. Some of my classmates find it hard to understand." Arthur unwrapped the sandwich thoughtfully. "But you help them, don't you?" Imani blinked, wondering how he knew. "Sometimes. When I can." "Even though you're tired?" His eyes met hers, seeing more than she'd meant to show. "Even though you're hungry yourself?" Heat rose to her cheeks. She hadn't expected him to notice, to understand the cost of her sharing. "It's not that bad," she mumbled. "Kindness often comes with a price," he said quietly. "But that doesn't make it any less valuable. Perhaps the opposite." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. A light breeze rustled through the park, carrying the scent of approaching spring. "What do you think of Romeo and Juliet so far?" Arthur asked, changing the subject with gentle consideration. Imani relaxed slightly, grateful for the shift. "It's interesting, but sometimes I think they make things more complicated than they need to be." "How so?" "Well, if they'd just talked to their parents honestly from the beginning." She trailed off, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. Arthur nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Communication can solve many problems, can't it?" They talked for a few more minutes about the play, about the universal themes that still resonated centuries later. Arthur spoke with the quiet authority of someone well-educated, but never made Imani feel inferior or uninformed. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Imani knew she needed to head home. "I should go," she said, standing up. "My mom will worry." "Of course." Arthur's voice was warm with understanding. "Thank you again, Imani, for the sandwich and for the conversation." She smiled, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow?" "Perhaps you will," he replied, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes kind. As Imani walked away, she couldn't help glancing back over her shoulder. Arthur still sat on the bench, but he had turned slightly to watch her leave. There was something thoughtful in his expression, something that seemed to look past the surface of their simple interaction to something deeper. She turned forward again, wondering what he saw when he looked at her, and why it felt like their conversations meant more than just shared sandwiches in a quiet park. The next afternoon brought warmer weather, sunlight streaming through the park's budding trees. Imani hurried along the path, her backpack bouncing against her shoulder as she walked faster than usual. Her last class had ended 5 minutes early, and she'd practically rushed out the door, worried she might miss Arthur. The bench stood empty when she arrived. Imani's heart sank a little, but she settled onto the worn wooden seat, pulling out her homework while she waited. The familiar ache of hunger gnawed at her stomach. She'd given most of her breakfast to a new student who'd forgotten his lunch money. "Good afternoon, Imani." Arthur's voice came from behind her, steady and gentle. She turned, relief washing over her face. "Hi, Mr. Arthur. I was worried you wouldn't come today." He settled onto the bench beside her, his movements careful but dignified. "The park is quite lovely at this hour. I find myself looking forward to our conversations." Imani reached into her backpack, pulling out the carefully wrapped sandwich half. Today's was a little smaller. They'd been running low on bread at home. "Here," she offered, trying to hide how her own stomach growled. Arthur accepted it with a small nod of thanks, but his eyes studied her face. "You look tired today." "Just busy with school," she said, managing a smile. "We had a big test in biology." "Ah, biology, an important subject for an aspiring nurse." His tone was casual, but his eyes were keen. "Tell me more about that dream of yours." Imani hesitated, then slowly began to speak. "I've wanted to be a nurse since I was little. My grandmother got sick when I was 8, and the nurses who took care of her were so kind. They made everything less scary." She paused, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "They helped her feel human, you know? Not just like a patient." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "That's an important distinction. How do you think they managed that?" "They listened," Imani said, warming to the subject. "They didn't just check vitals and give medicine. They asked about her day, remembered little details about her life. One nurse even brought in pictures of flowers when my grandmother mentioned missing her garden. Small acts of kindness can have profound effects," Arthur observed, "rather like sharing lunch with a stranger in the park." Imani ducked her head, embarrassed. "That's different." "Is it?" His voice held a gentle challenge. "Why?" She thought about it for a moment. Because it's such a small thing. Anyone would do it. But they don't, do they?" Arthur gestured to the people walking past, absorbed in their phones or conversations, unseeing. "Many people pass by this bench every day." Imani shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe they're just busy." "Perhaps." Arthur took a small bite of the sandwich. "Tell me more about your nursing plans. Have you looked into schools?" The question made her stomach clench with anxiety, worse than hunger. "Some. There's a good nursing program at State, but—" She trailed off, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "But?" Arthur prompted gently. "But it's expensive," she admitted quietly. "Really expensive. Even with scholarships, I'd need loans. And my mom, she swallowed hard. She works so hard already. I can't ask her to co-sign loans that big. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering. What would you do if money wasn't an obstacle? Imani's eyes lit up despite her fatigue. I'd apply right away. Take all the prerequisites. Maybe even volunteer at the hospital to get experience. There's a summer program for high school students interested in healthcare, but… She caught herself, the light dimming. Well, it doesn't matter. Knowledge and compassion are powerful combinations, Arthur said thoughtfully. Why do you think so few people possess both? Maybe because it's hard to keep caring when life is difficult, Imani replied, thinking of her mother's exhaustion after double shifts. Sometimes just getting through the day takes everything you have. And yet, here you sit, sharing what little you have, Arthur observed. Even when you're clearly tired and hungry yourself. Imani's cheeks flushed. She hadn't realized her hunger was so obvious. It's not that bad, she insisted. You remind me of someone I once knew, Arthur said, his voice taking on a distant quality. She believed that true wealth wasn't in what you kept, but in what you gave away. Was she a nurse, too? A shadow of something. Grief, perhaps, crossed Arthur's face. No, but she understood healing in her own way. She knew that sometimes the medicine people need most isn't the kind you find in a hospital. They sat quietly for a moment, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the path, searching for crumbs. Imani's stomach growled again, more insistently this time. She tried to cover the sound with a cough. Arthur turned to her, his eyes gentle but serious. You give more than you have, Imani. She shrugged, forcing a smile. Sometimes that's what people need. The words came out before she could stop them, surprising herself with their honesty. Arthur nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or decision. But he said nothing more, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the afternoon light began to soften around them. The next day's afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park path as Imani approached the familiar bench. Her steps slowed when she saw it was empty. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes Arthur arrived a few minutes after she did. She settled onto the worn wooden seat, pulling out her homework while she waited. Minutes ticked by. Imani found herself reading the same paragraph over and over, unable to focus. Her eyes kept darting to the path where Arthur usually appeared. The half-sandwich sat heavy in her backpack, waiting to be shared. A young couple walked past, hand in hand. A mother pushed a stroller, cooing to her baby. An old woman with a small dog. But no Arthur. Imani checked her phone. 30 minutes had passed, longer than she'd ever waited before. The afternoon light was starting to take on that golden quality that meant evening wasn't far off. Her mother would worry if she was too late getting home. Maybe he's just busy today, she whispered to herself, trying to quiet the unease growing in her chest. But something felt different. Wrong. She unzipped her backpack and carefully removed the sandwich half, wrapped neatly in wax paper. For a moment, she held it in her hands, remembering all their conversations. Arthur's gentle questions, his thoughtful advice, the way he'd listened, really listened, when she talked about her dreams. Gently, she placed the sandwich on the bench where he usually sat. It felt like both a hopeful gesture and a goodbye, though she wasn't sure which she meant it to be. The walk home felt longer than usual. Imani kept glancing back, half expecting to see Arthur's familiar figure on the bench. But the park grew smaller behind her, and he never appeared. That night, she picked at her dinner, unable to shake the hollow feeling in her chest. Her mother noticed her quiet mood, but didn't press when Imani said she was just tired from studying. Later, lying in bed, Imani stared at her ceiling. She wondered if Arthur was okay. Had something happened to him? Would she ever know? The thought that their daily conversations might just stop with no explanation made her throat tight. She'd known he was just a stranger in the park. She hadn't even known his last name. But somehow, over those afternoon talks, he'd become more than that. He'd become someone who saw her, really saw her, and understood why she did the things she did. Morning came too quickly. Imani went through her usual routine mechanically, making her lunch without bothering to cut it in half. The morning felt gray despite the sunshine, weighted down by yesterday's disappointment. At school, she tried to focus on her classes, but her mind kept wandering to the empty bench in the park. During lunch, she sat with her usual group but barely participated in the conversation, pushing her food around on her tray. The final bell rang, releasing students into the afternoon. Imani walked slowly down the front steps of the school, dreading another disappointing visit to the park. That's when she heard the whispers. "Oh my God! Look at that car! Is that a Rolls Royce? Who's here?" A crowd of students gathered near the curb, phones out, recording. Imani followed their gazes to the sleek black vehicle idling in front of the school. It looked like something from a movie. Gleaming paint, tinted windows, impossible elegance. The principal hurried down the steps, straightening his tie. Before he could reach the car, the driver's door opened. A tall man in a crisp uniform stepped out, his movements precise and professional. He surveyed the growing crowd of students until his eyes landed on Imani. "Miss Brooks," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the murmuring crowd. "Miss Imani Brooks?" The whispers grew louder. Imani felt her classmates turning to stare at her. Her feet seemed frozen to the spot. "Are you Miss Brooks?" the driver asked again, walking toward her. Imani managed a small nod. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Imani Brooks. Would you please come with me?" He gestured toward the car with a white-gloved hand. The crowd parted as Imani walked forward, her heart pounding. What was happening? Was she in some kind of trouble? The principal watched with a mixture of concern and curiosity as she approached the vehicle. The driver opened the rear door with a fluid movement. Imani hesitated, then leaned forward to look inside. Her breath caught in her throat. Arthur sat in the plush leather interior, but he was transformed. Gone were the worn clothes and tired posture. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than her mother made in a month. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his bearing straight and dignified. Most striking was the quiet power that seemed to radiate from him, not the gentle weariness she'd known, but the unmistakable presence of someone used to moving mountains with a single word. His eyes, though, his eyes were the same, kind, observant, knowing. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he watched recognition dawn on her face, the same smile she'd seen so many times on the park bench. But now it carried the weight of secrets finally ready to be revealed. The leather seat felt impossibly soft beneath Imani as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The world outside the tinted windows seemed distant now, the whispers of her classmates muffled by the car's pristine interior. The air smelled of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. Arthur sat across from her, his familiar eyes twinkling despite his transformed appearance. The silence stretched between them until he finally spoke, his voice carrying the same gentleness she remembered from the park bench. "I imagine you have questions," he said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his tailored pants. "I owe you answers, and so much more." Imani's hands twisted in her lap. Who are you, really?" "My name is Arthur Hale," he began, his voice steady but touched with emotion. 20 years ago, I founded Hale Healthcare Solutions. We built hospitals, developed medical programs, saved lives." He paused, watching her face. "You might have seen our logo at St. Mary's Hospital downtown." Imani's eyes widened. Everyone knew St. Mary's. It was the biggest hospital in the city. Her mother had worked there as a cleaning lady years ago. "But that's not why I was in the park," Arthur continued. He looked down at his hands, and for a moment, Imani saw glimpses of the tired man from the bench. "My wife, Margaret, passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. Despite all my money, all my connections." His voice caught slightly. After losing her, nothing felt real anymore. The business meetings, the charity galas, the constant requests for money. It all seemed hollow. The car glided to a stop at a red light, smooth as silk. Outside, people walked past, unaware of the conversation happening behind the tinted windows. "So, I withdrew," Arthur said. "Stepped back from the company. Stopped attending events." But isolation didn't help. I needed to understand if genuine kindness still existed in the world, not because of wealth or status, but simply because someone needed it. He reached into a compartment and pulled out a familiar piece of wax paper. "The sandwich half she'd left on the bench yesterday. When you first offered to share your lunch, I could see you were hungry yourself. But you gave anyway. Day after day, you gave. Not for recognition, not for reward. You gave because you saw someone in need." Imani felt her cheeks warm. "It was just a sandwich," she mumbled. Arthur shook his head. "It was never just a sandwich, Imani. It was proof that real compassion still exists. You showed me that." He leaned forward slightly. "And now I want to help you the way you helped me." From his briefcase, he withdrew a folder. "I've spoken with your principal this morning. Your grades are excellent, especially in sciences. You want to be a nurse?" Imani nodded, her throat tight. "I'm prepared to offer you a full scholarship, not just for college, but for any medical program you wish to pursue. Nursing, pre-med, whatever path you choose." He opened the folder, revealing documents with official letterheads. "Additionally, I can arrange internships, mentorship programs, and practical experience at any of our facilities." The words swam before Imani's eyes. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Arthur said gently. "Take time to discuss it with your mother. All the details are in here." He handed her the folder. "But no, this isn't charity, Imani. You've earned this through your actions, your character, your genuine desire to help others, even when you had little yourself." The car had circled back to the school. Imani could see students still lingering, phones out, trying to peek through the windows. "Why me?" she whispered, clutching the folder like it might disappear. "There are lots of people who need help." Arthur's eyes softened. "Because you helped me when you thought I was nothing but a lonely old man on a bench. Because you gave away half your lunch even when you were hungry. Because you listened to my stories and shared your dreams without knowing who I was." He smiled. "Because you have the heart of a healer already. You just need the opportunity to become one." The driver opened Imani's door. The sounds of the outside world rushed in. Whispers, gasps, the click of phone cameras. Before stepping out, she turned back to Arthur. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for this, but for trusting me with your story." "Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists," he replied. "We'll talk more soon. Your mother and I have a lot to discuss." Imani stepped out of the car, holding the folder against her chest. The crowd of students parted before her, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. She could hear them whispering, see them typing frantically on their phones. Teachers watched from the school steps, their faces showing varying degrees of surprise and curiosity. The Rolls Royce pulled away smoothly, leaving Imani standing in a world that felt completely different from the one she'd walked through just 15 minutes ago. The weight of the folder in her arms promised possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Her future, once limited by financial constraints, had suddenly expanded beyond her wildest dreams. Her classmates stared, but their looks held none of the familiar pity or indifference. In their eyes, she had transformed, just as Arthur had, from someone easily overlooked into someone impossible to ignore. The thought made her straighten her shoulders slightly, though her hands trembled around the edges of the folder that held her future. Principal Hayes sat behind his desk, carefully examining the documents spread before him. His reading glasses perched low on his nose as he looked up at Imani, who fidgeted in the cushioned chair across from him. "Well, Miss Brooks," he said, his deep voice measured and thoughtful, "I've confirmed everything with Mr. Hale's office. His credentials are impeccable." He lifted a sheet of paper. "The Hale Foundation has an extensive history of educational philanthropy. Their scholarship program is highly respected." Imani's hands twisted in her lap. "So it's real?" "Very real." Principal Hayes removed his glasses, folding them carefully. "I've spoken with Mr. Hale personally. His offer is genuine and, quite frankly, extraordinary." A small smile crossed his usually stern face. "Though I must admit, when a Rolls Royce appeared in front of my school this morning, I was concerned." "I still can't believe it," Imani said softly. "He was just there on that bench, every day." Sometimes life surprises us in remarkable ways. Principal Hayes leaned forward. "Your teachers have always spoken highly of you, Imani. Your academic record is stellar, especially considering your circumstances." He paused. "Which reminds me, Mrs. Patterson would like to speak with you about advanced placement options for next semester." As if on cue, there was a knock at the office door. Mrs. Patterson, Imani's science teacher, poked her head in. Her face lit up when she saw Imani. "Oh, good, you're here." She bustled in, carrying a stack of papers. "Imani, I've been reviewing your work from this semester. Your understanding of biology is remarkable. With proper preparation, you could easily test into AP Biology next term." Imani blinked, surprised. She'd always done well in science, but teachers rarely suggested advanced classes to students from her neighborhood. "Really?" "Absolutely." Mrs. Patterson's enthusiasm was evident. "And with Mr. Hale's support, we could arrange additional tutoring to help you prepare. This could give you a significant advantage when you begin your nursing studies." Throughout the rest of the school day, Imani noticed subtle but distinct changes. Teachers who had previously overlooked her now stopped to chat in the hallways. Her English teacher mentioned a writing competition perfect for college applications. Even the guidance counselor, who she'd rarely spoken to, tracked her down to discuss SAT prep courses. The afternoon passed in a blur, until finally, Imani found herself walking home. Her backpack felt heavier with all the additional information she'd been given. College brochures, scholarship paperwork, advanced course syllabi. But her steps were light, almost floating. She arrived home to find her mother's car already in the driveway. Unusual for this time of day. Entering the small apartment, she heard voices from the living room. "Understand your concerns, Mrs. Brooks," Arthur was saying. He sat in their worn armchair, looking perfectly at ease despite the humble surroundings. "I want to be completely transparent about my intentions." Laverne Brooks sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, still wearing her work uniform from her morning shift. Her eyes darted to Imani as she entered. "Baby, you're home," Mr. Hale was just explaining. "Everything." Arthur smiled warmly at Imani. "I thought it was important to meet with your mother properly, to discuss the details of the scholarship, and address any questions or concerns." Laverne's expression was a mix of hope and hesitation. It's very generous, Mr. Hale. But why Imani? Why us?" "Because your daughter showed me genuine kindness when she thought I was nothing but a stranger," Arthur replied. She shared what little she had, consistently, without expecting anything in return. He glanced at Imani. That kind of character is rare. It deserves to be nurtured. Imani watched her mother's face soften slightly. Laverne had always taught her to be kind, even when they barely had enough for themselves. The scholarship covers everything, Arthur continued, pulling out more documents. Tuition, books, housing if needed. There's also a monthly stipend for living expenses. He handed the papers to Laverne. I want Imani to focus on her studies, not worry about finances. Laverne's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the numbers. This is more than generous. It's an investment, Arthur corrected gently, in someone who I believe will make an exceptional healthcare professional. He smiled at Imani. Someone who already understands that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about compassion. They spent the next hour going through the details. Arthur answered every question patiently, his responses clear and honest. Slowly, Laverne's rigid posture relaxed. When Arthur mentioned connecting Imani with working nurses for mentorship, Laverne's eyes grew misty. I always wanted to give her more opportunities, she whispered, to make sure she could follow her dreams. You've given her something far more valuable, Arthur replied. You've raised a daughter with a beautiful heart. Now let me help give her the tools to use it. By the time Arthur left, the apartment felt different somehow. The same worn furniture sat in the same places, but the air hummed with possibility rather than resignation. Laverne hugged Imani tightly, something she hadn't done in years. Baby, I'm so proud of you, she whispered. So proud. Later that night, Imani lay in her narrow bed, staring at the water stain on her ceiling. But for the first time, she didn't see the mark as a sign of what they couldn't afford to fix. Instead, her mind wandered to hospital corridors, to nursing scrubs, to helping others heal. Her dream of becoming a nurse, once as faint as stars behind city smog, now shone clear and bright. The folder from Arthur sat on her desk, filled with papers that transformed someday into soon. Her backpack leaned against the chair, heavy with advanced course materials and college preparation guides. On her nightstand, half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper waited for tomorrow's lunch. Old habits dying hard, even in the face of change. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Imani's desk as she organized her new study materials. Her old spiral notebooks now sat beside pristine SAT prep guides and medical terminology flashcards. The change felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life while keeping her own heart. Arthur had arranged for her to attend an after-school medical preparatory program at the local community college 3 days a week. Today would be her first session. She traced her fingers over the crisp student ID card, her photo looking back at her with nervous eyes. "You've got everything?" Laverne asked from the doorway, holding a travel mug of coffee. She'd switched her morning shift to accommodate Imani's new schedule, a small change that spoke volumes about her support. "I think so." Imani zipped up her new backpack, a gift from Arthur that didn't have fraying seams or broken zippers. The program coordinator said they'd provide all the basic supplies. "Mr. Hale called this morning," Laverne said, her voice warming. "He's arranged for a car service to take you to and from the college. Said he doesn't want you walking across town after dark." The sleek black car waiting outside their apartment complex looked nothing like the worn city bus Imani usually took. The driver, James, tipped his hat and opened the door with a gentle smile. "Miss Brooks?" During the ride, Imani pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching familiar streets pass by. Everything looked different from inside the quiet, climate-controlled interior. She thought of Arthur on his park bench, seeing the world through a different lens than what others assumed. The community college campus sprawled before her, all red brick and wide windows. In the medical sciences building, she found herself in a bright classroom with 10 other students. Modern anatomical models lined the walls, and each desk had a new laptop. "Welcome to the Healthcare Foundations program," Dr. Sarah Williams announced, her white coat pristine over casual clothes. "You're here because someone saw your potential. Now, let's develop it." The next 3 hours flew by. They covered basic medical terminology, practiced taking vital signs on sophisticated training mannequins, and discussed real-world scenarios. Dr. Williams moved through the room, offering patient guidance and answering questions Imani had always been too hesitant to ask in her regular classes. During their break, a guest speaker arrived, Nicole, a registered nurse from the local hospital. She sat with the students, sharing stories from her 12 years in the emergency department. "The technical skills matter," Nicole explained, her eyes finding Imani's eager face. "But what makes a great nurse is empathy. You need to see the person, not just the patient." Imani thought of all the times she'd wanted to help people but lacked the knowledge. Now, watching Nicole demonstrate proper wound dressing technique, she felt pieces of her future clicking into place. The weeks fell into a new rhythm. Mornings at school seemed sharper, more focused. Her teachers noticed her growing confidence, especially in science classes. After school, James would drive her to the prep program, where each session built on the last. Some days, Arthur would join her for early dinner afterward, listening to her excited descriptions of what she'd learned. "The heart has 4 chambers," she explained one evening, sketching on a napkin. "The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the superior and inferior vena cava," Arthur finished, smiling at her surprise. "I may have picked up a few things running my healthcare company." He became a steady presence, offering guidance without pushing. When Imani struggled with a particularly difficult chemistry concept, he arranged for extra tutoring. When she mentioned an interest in pediatric nursing, he connected her with a retired pediatric nurse who became a valuable mentor. At home, the changes were subtle but significant. Laverne started keeping regular hours instead of constant overtime. The fridge stayed fuller. On weekends, mother and daughter could finally relax together, watching movies or trying new recipes instead of worrying about bills. Then came the letter. The envelope was thick, bearing the logo of Preston Medical Academy, one of the most prestigious summer programs for aspiring healthcare professionals. Arthur had encouraged her to apply, but Imani had tempered her hopes. "Open it," Laverne urged, sitting beside her on their small couch. "Whatever it says, we're proud of you." Imani's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The first word she saw was, "Congratulations." She read it twice, then 3 times. The program had not only accepted her, they'd offered her a full scholarship. 6 weeks of intensive medical training, hands-on experience, and mentorship from leading healthcare professionals. "Baby!" Laverne pulled her into a tight hug, her own eyes glistening. "I knew you could do it." Later that evening, Imani stood in front of her bedroom mirror, holding the acceptance letter. Her reflection showed someone both familiar and new. The same kind eyes, but they sparkled with possibility now. The same gentle smile, but it held more confidence. She thought about the path that led here, sharing sandwiches with a stranger, choosing kindness when she had little to give, holding on to her dreams even when they seemed impossible. The letter in her hands wasn't just about summer plans. It was proof that compassion could open doors she never knew existed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Arthur. "Congratulations. This is just the beginning." Imani smiled at her reflection, allowing herself to feel the full weight of this moment. The joy wasn't just about her future in medicine anymore. It was about watching her mother relax, seeing Arthur's faith in humanity restored, and knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. In the mirror, her smile grew wider, more certain. The acceptance letter felt warm in her hands, like a promise finally kept. The morning sun streamed through the school hallways, but something felt different. Imani noticed it as soon as she stepped through the main entrance. Conversations hushed when she passed. Groups of students huddled together, stealing glances in her direction. At her locker, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. Just appeared out of nowhere in that fancy car. Never even seen her family before. Suddenly getting all these special treatments. Imani's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her books. She'd expected some attention after the Rolls Royce incident, but this felt different. Heavier. Darker. In first period English, her usual seat partner, Jessica, barely acknowledged her. When Imani tried to share notes about their group project, Jessica gave short, clipped responses. The distance hurt more than outright hostility would have. Between classes, she overheard Marcus Thompson, the student body president, talking to his friends. It's weird, right? Like, one day she's nobody, the next day she's got some rich guy backing her? Maybe she's just lucky, someone offered. Marcus scoffed. Yeah, right. Nobody gets that lucky. The whispers followed her to chemistry class, where she'd recently started excelling thanks to the extra tutoring. As she correctly answered a question about molecular structures, someone in the back muttered, "Teacher's pet." A few snickers followed. During lunch, Imani sat alone at her usual table, no longer sharing half her sandwich with anyone. The irony wasn't lost on her. Now that she had enough food, she felt less like eating. Mrs. Davidson, the college counselor, called her in during study hall. The office felt smaller than usual, more confining. The counselor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Imani, we need to discuss your situation. Mrs. Davidson shuffled some papers on her desk. While we're thrilled about your opportunities, there are concerns about the nature of your relationship with Mr. Hale? Heat rushed to Imani's face. What do you mean? It's unusual for a wealthy stranger to take such interest in a student. Mrs. Davidson's voice was carefully neutral. We need to ensure everything is appropriate. He sat alone in the park, Imani said, her voice quiet but firm. I shared my lunch with him, that's all. And that led to a full ride to Preston Medical Academy? Mrs. Davidson raised an eyebrow. You understand how this looks? Imani's throat tightened. I didn't ask for any of this. I was just being kind. Of course, dear. Mrs. Davidson's tone suggested she didn't believe it. We'll need to review the situation with the administration. In the meantime, perhaps keep your arrangement more discreet. Walking out of the office, Imani felt eyes following her. Her phone buzzed, a message from Arthur asking how her day was going. She couldn't bring herself to respond yet. In the bathroom between classes, she overheard two girls talking, not realizing she was in one of the stalls. Did you hear about that scholarship girl? The one with the rich sponsor? Yeah, totally sketchy. Like, what did she do to get his attention? Right? People like her don't just get chances like that. Maybe she's like his secret granddaughter or something. Or something, the other girl said meaningfully. Imani waited until they left before emerging. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection. The same face that had smiled with such hope just yesterday now looked back at her with uncertainty. During her final class, she received a text from Arthur. Can we talk? I'll have James pick you up after school. In the parking lot, the familiar black car waited. Some students pointed and whispered. James opened the door with his usual courtesy, but even his smile seemed concerned today. Arthur sat in the back, his face troubled. I heard there have been questions. Imani nodded, not trusting her voice. I should have anticipated this, he sighed. People often suspect ulterior motives when they can't understand simple kindness. They think I manipulated you. Imani said softly. Or that there's something wrong about why you're helping me. Arthur's face darkened. There's nothing wrong about recognizing genuine character and wanting to nurture it. You showed compassion when you had every reason not to. That's rare, Imani. That's worth investing in. But maybe they're right, she whispered. Maybe I don't deserve all this. Stop. Arthur's voice was gentle but firm. You earned this through 1,000 small choices that no one saw. Through sharing food you couldn't spare. Through helping others when you needed help yourself. Through maintaining your dignity and dreams despite everything. The car slowed at a red light. Through the tinted windows, Imani could see students from her school walking home, pointing at the car, whispering behind their hands. What do I do? She asked. You keep going, Arthur said. Success often attracts doubters. But remember, those who question your character most loudly usually reveal more about themselves than about you. As they pulled up to her apartment building, Imani heard one final snippet of conversation from a passing group of students. People like her don't get chances like that without strings. The words followed her inside, heavy as shadows, even as she tried to hold on to Arthur's reassurance. She wondered if this was the price of opportunity, having others question not just your luck, but your very character. Principal Hayes's office felt colder than usual that morning. The familiar photos of graduating classes and academic achievements that lined the walls now seemed to stare down at Imani with judgment. She sat rigidly in the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Miss Brooks, Principal Hayes began, his voice carrying a weight she'd never heard before. I'm afraid we have a serious situation. He adjusted his reading glasses, lifting a formal-looking document. A complaint has been filed regarding your scholarship and acceptance to the Preston Medical Academy summer program. Imani's throat tightened. A complaint? Yes. Several parties have raised concerns about the circumstances surrounding Mr. Hale's involvement with you and the school. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There are also questions about Mr. Hale's past business practices that have come to light. The local newspaper sat on his desk, folded to show a headline. Healthcare Mogul's Past Scrutinized After Teen's Sudden Scholarship. Imani's stomach churned at the sight of her yearbook photo next to an old picture of Arthur in a business suit. Until these matters are resolved, Principal Hayes continued, the scholarship committee has decided to suspend all arrangements pending a full investigation. The word suspend hit Imani like a physical blow. But the summer program starts in 3 weeks. I understand this is difficult. Principal Hayes removed his glasses, his expression softening slightly. But we have to ensure everything is above board. Mr. Hale's company faced several lawsuits in the past regarding questionable business practices. We need to verify that these current arrangements are legitimate and appropriate. Through the office window, Imani could see students crossing the courtyard, their lives continuing normally while hers crumbled. A news van sat parked at the school entrance, its satellite dish reaching toward the sky like an accusing finger. The media attention has complicated things, Principal Hayes explained. We've received calls from several news outlets. They're interested in the story of a... He glanced at a reporter's message. Mysterious billionaire's sudden interest in a local student. Imani's phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd been avoiding checking it all morning, knowing it would be filled with messages and social media notifications. The story had spread quickly through their small community. Imani swallowed hard. Has anyone heard from Mr. Hale? Principal Hayes shook his head. His office released a statement saying he's stepping back from all public engagements to avoid any appearance of impropriety. They've suspended contact with the school pending the investigation's completion. The abandonment stung worse than the suspension. Arthur had become like family, a grandfather figure who believed in her dreams. Now he was gone, retreating behind corporate statements and closed doors. What am I supposed to do? Imani's voice came out smaller than she intended. Focus on your regular studies. Continue as you were before. Principal Hayes sounded apologetic but firm. The truth will come out in time. If everything is as straightforward as you've claimed, this will all be resolved. But Imani could hear the doubt in his voice, the same doubt that had been spreading through the school halls like poison. Walking out of his office, she felt exposed, as if everyone could see her dreams dissolving around her. In class, teachers who had recently praised her potential now avoided eye contact. Students who had congratulated her last week now whispered behind their hands. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications, messages from reporters, comments on social media, texts from people she barely knew asking for the real story. When the final bell rang, Imani couldn't face the news van still waiting outside. She slipped out through a side door, taking the long way home. The spring air felt heavy with humidity and unspoken judgments. Her mother was already home, having left work early after receiving Principal Hayes's call. Laverne Brooks stood in their small kitchen, worry etched across her face. "Baby?" she started, opening her arms. Imani fell into her mother's embrace, finally letting the tears fall. "Everything's ruined." "Not ruined." Laverne stroked her daughter's hair. "Just paused. We got by before all this. We'll get by now." "But it was all starting to feel real," Imani's voice cracked. "The program, college, becoming a nurse. It wasn't just a dream anymore. And now everyone thinks I did something wrong to get it." Laverne pulled back, wiping Imani's tears with her thumbs. "You didn't do anything wrong. You showed kindness to someone who needed it. That's who you are, who I raised you to be. Then why did he leave? Why won't he defend me?" Her mother sighed. Sometimes when people with power face questions, they protect themselves first. It's not right, but it's how the world often works. Imani picked up her phone, scrolling through the barrage of messages. No word from Arthur. Nothing from the man who had sat with her in that park, who had shared her simple lunches and listened to her dreams. "I need some air," she said quietly. "You want me to come with you?" Imani shook her head. "I just need to think." The park was quiet in the early evening light. A few people walked their dogs, deliberately averting their eyes as she passed. Everyone in town knew her face now, knew the story, or thought they did. The bench where it had all started sat empty, bathed in golden sunlight. Imani lowered herself onto the worn wood, feeling its familiar grooves. This was where she'd first noticed Arthur, where she'd made that first choice to share her lunch, where they'd talked about hopes and possibilities. Now she sat alone, the other half of the bench empty, the space beside her as vacant as the future that had seemed so bright just days ago. The next afternoon, Imani stood in her kitchen, methodically preparing a sandwich. Her movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as she spread peanut butter across the bread. The familiar action brought a flood of memories. All those mornings making lunch to share with Arthur, the quiet conversations, the hope that had bloomed and withered so quickly. Her mother had left a note on the counter. "Working late. Dinner in fridge. Love you." The sight of her mother's hurried handwriting made Imani's chest tighten. They were back where they started, counting every dollar, measuring every meal. She carefully cut the sandwich in half, wrapping each portion separately. The action was so ingrained now that her hands moved on their own. For a moment, she stood staring at the two halves, remembering how it all began. The walk to the park felt different today. No excitement, no anticipation of seeing Arthur. Just the heavy weight of recent events pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Probably another reporter or curious stranger. She'd stopped checking messages altogether. The spring afternoon was warm, sunlight filtering through the trees that lined the familiar path. A few people glanced her way as she entered the park, recognition flickering across their faces before they quickly looked away. The local news coverage had made her uncomfortably recognizable. Arthur's bench sat empty, as she knew it would. But today, she noticed details she'd overlooked before. An elderly woman on another bench, feeding crumbs to pigeons from a small paper bag. The woman's coat was clean but worn at the edges, her shoes scuffed but carefully maintained. She had that same quiet dignity Imani had first noticed in Arthur. Imani's feet carried her forward before her mind fully registered the decision. The woman looked up as she approached, wariness crossing her weathered features. "Would you like half of my sandwich?" Imani held out the wrapped portion. "It's peanut butter." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise, then settled into something softer. "You're that girl from the news," she said quietly. Imani's hand wavered slightly, but she kept it extended. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Imani." The woman studied her for a long moment. "Martha," she finally replied, accepting the sandwich half with careful hands. "Thank you, Imani." Imani sat beside her, unwrapping her own portion. They ate in companionable silence, watching the pigeons hop around their feet. Martha didn't ask about Arthur or the scandal. She just shared her breadcrumbs with Imani, showing her how to toss them so the smaller birds got their share. "Some people think these birds are pests," Martha said, scattering another handful. "But they're just trying to get by, same as anybody else." Imani nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in those words. The next day, Imani returned to the park with another sandwich. This time she shared it with an older man reading a dog-eared paperback. His name was James, and he spoke softly about the library where he used to work before budget cuts eliminated his position. Each afternoon brought new connections. A retired teacher grading papers in the sunshine. A grandmother waiting for a bus that wouldn't come for hours. A man in a suit who'd lost his job but still dressed up every day, holding on to his dignity. Some refused her offers, but Imani kept returning. She learned their names, their small stories, the quiet struggles they carried. She didn't tell them about Arthur or her lost opportunities. Instead, she listened, shared what little she had, and discovered that giving hope felt different than receiving it. One particularly warm afternoon, she noticed a new face, a woman probably in her 60s, sitting stiffly on a bench near the playground. Her clothes were neat but showed signs of wear, and her eyes held that distant look Imani had come to recognize. The look of someone trying to remain invisible while carrying heavy burdens. Approaching the bench, Imani felt none of the hesitation that had gripped her that first day with Arthur. This wasn't about changing her future anymore. It was about sharing the present moment with someone who needed it. "Hello," she said softly, not wanting to startle the woman. "Would you like to share my lunch?" The woman turned, surprise flickering across her features. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, relaxed slightly. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Imani said, already unwrapping half the sandwich. "I'd enjoy the company." For a moment, the woman seemed to struggle with herself, pride warring with need. Finally, she nodded, accepting the offering with trembling fingers. "Thank you, dear. I'm Margaret." "I'm Imani." She settled onto the bench, carefully maintaining the respectful distance she'd learned these past few days. "Do you like to watch the children play?" Margaret's eyes returned to the playground, where young children chased each other through the spring sunshine. "My grandchildren used to play here," she said softly. "Before we moved away. I come back sometimes, just to remember." Imani unwrapped her own half of the sandwich, letting the conversation unfold naturally. She'd learned that sometimes people needed food, and sometimes they just needed someone to witness their memories. They sat together, eating slowly, watching the children play. Margaret gradually shared pieces of her story. A move for medical treatments, mounting bills, the distance growing between her and her family. Imani listened, offering nothing but her presence and half a peanut butter sandwich. When Margaret finished eating, she carefully folded the wrapper into a tiny square. "You know," she said, her voice steadier now, "I was beginning to think nobody noticed anymore, that we'd all become invisible to each other." Imani thought about Arthur, about all the people who walked past this park every day, about how easy it was to look without seeing. She placed her hand gently on the bench between them, not quite touching Margaret, but close enough to share warmth. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "being noticed is the most important thing we can give each other." Imani stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her neatly pressed blouse for the 5th time. Her mother had ironed it last night, staying up late to make sure every crease was perfect. The collar felt stiff against her neck, like armor she wasn't sure she needed. "Baby, you ready?" her mother called from the kitchen. "We should leave early to beat traffic." "Coming, Mom." Imani grabbed her folder of documentation, newspaper clippings, acceptance letters, the original scholarship offer. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked it into her backpack. The kitchen smelled of coffee and worry. Her mother had made toast, but neither of them touched it. Laverne Brooks looked tired, the night shift visible in the shadows under her eyes, but she'd put on her best dress, the one usually reserved for church. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," Laverne said, adjusting Imani's collar. "Just tell the truth." "I know, Mom." Imani managed a small smile. "That's all I have anyway." The drive to school was quiet. Usually Imani walked, but today felt different. Her mother had switched shifts to be there, and the morning traffic crawled along like it was trying to delay the inevitable. They arrived early, as planned. The school hallways were empty except for a few early teachers who glanced their way with mixed expressions of pity and curiosity. The hearing would take place in the library. Neutral ground, they'd said, though it felt anything but neutral to Imani. Principal Matthews met them at the library door. "The panel's ready whenever you are," she said, her tone carefully professional. "Take a moment if you need it." Inside, 5 people sat at a long table. 2 school board members, a district administrator, the head of the scholarship committee, and a parent representative. Their faces were arranged in careful masks of impartiality. Chairs had been set up facing the panel. Imani noticed some were already filled. Teachers, a few parents, even some students who must have gotten permission to attend. Her stomach tightened at the size of the audience. "Miss Brooks," one of the board members began, "please take a seat." Imani sat down, her mother beside her. The folder lay in her lap, untouched. She'd prepared notes, practiced responses, but now none of that felt right. "We're here to review the circumstances surrounding your scholarship and program acceptance," the administrator stated, shuffling papers. "Specifically, the nature of your relationship with Mr. Arthur Hale and any potential impropriety in the opportunities extended to you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Imani felt the weight of every eye in the room. "Would you please explain, in your own words, how you met Mr. Hale?" Imani took a deep breath. She looked down at her folder, then deliberately set it aside. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "I saw him sitting alone in the park," she began. "Not just once, but every day. He looked forgotten. Not homeless, not hungry exactly, but lonely in a way that felt familiar." She described those first moments of hesitation, the internal debate over giving away half her lunch. "I know what it's like to be hungry," she admitted, "to stretch food, to drink water, to feel full. But I also know what it's like to need someone to see you, really see you." The panel members exchanged glances as she continued, describing the daily ritual that developed. We didn't talk much at first. Sometimes we just sat together. He never asked for anything. Not money, not help, not even the food. I offered because that's what you're supposed to do when you see someone hurting. And you had no idea of his wealth or position? The scholarship head asked. No, Imani said firmly. I didn't care who he was. That wasn't the point. What was the point then? This from the parent representative, her tone genuinely curious. Imani straightened in her chair. Dignity, she said. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Rich or poor, young or old. It doesn't matter. When I share my lunch with someone, I'm not just giving them food. I'm saying, I see you. You matter. She felt her mother's hand squeeze her knee supportively. Mr. Hale didn't need my sandwich, she continued. He needed someone to sit with him, to talk to him like a person, not a problem or an opportunity. That's what I did, every day. Because that's what people should do for each other. The administrator leaned forward. But surely you must have hoped for some reward. No, Imani said, her voice stronger now. I hoped he wouldn't be alone. I hoped he'd feel less forgotten. That's all. She glanced at her mother, drawing strength from her presence. When Arthur, Mr. Hale, offered to help with my education, it wasn't payment for being kind. He saw something in me that I barely dared to see in myself. He offered me a chance, not because I gave him food, but because he believed I would use that chance to help others. The room had grown very still. Even the usual shuffle of papers had ceased. I want to be a nurse, Imani continued, her voice catching slightly. Not for the money or status, but because I want to help people keep their dignity when they're at their most vulnerable. That's what I did in the park, not just with Mr. Hale, but with others after he left. I'm still doing it now because it's right, not because anyone's watching or offering rewards. She looked directly at each panel member in turn. You can take away the scholarship. You can question Mr. Hale's motives or mine, but you can't take away the truth of what happened. Two people shared lunch on a park bench, and both were less alone because of it. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. The panel members looked at each other, then back at Imani. Their carefully neutral expressions had cracked, revealing glimpses of genuine emotion beneath. But their decision remained unreadable, suspended in the quiet of the library like a held breath. The silence in the library hung thick and heavy. Imani's words seemed to hover in the air, touching something deep within each person present. The panel members shuffled their papers, their expressions conflicted. Principal Matthews opened her mouth to speak, when a commotion outside the library doors drew everyone's attention. The double doors swung open with deliberate purpose. Arthur Hale stepped in, his presence commanding yet gentle. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, but his eyes held that same quiet warmth Imani remembered from the park bench. He wasn't alone. Behind him filed in a distinguished group of people, men and women whose faces Imani recognized from local news and community events. Dr. Sarah Walker, Chief of Surgery at Memorial Hospital. Pastor James Thompson from First Baptist. Maria Rodriguez, Director of the Downtown Youth Center. And others, at least a dozen more, each carrying themselves with quiet dignity. The panel members straightened in their chairs, clearly recognizing many of the faces. The parent representative's eyes widened as she noticed Judge William Barrett among them. Arthur stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly on the library floor. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle strength Imani remembered. "But I believe this hearing would benefit from a complete picture." Principal Matthews found her voice first. "Mr. Hale, this is meant to be a closed proceeding." "With respect," Dr. Walker cut in, stepping forward. "We're all here as character witnesses, both for Arthur and for his judgment regarding Imani Brooks. Murmurs rippled through the room. The district administrator leaned forward, clearly recognizing the political weight suddenly assembled before them. 20 years ago, Pastor Thompson spoke up, his deep voice resonating through the library, Arthur Hale funded our church's first food bank, not with fanfare or press releases, but quietly, consistently. He visited every week, not to supervise, but to serve alongside volunteers. Maria Rodriguez nodded. The Youth Center's college scholarship program? Arthur started that 15 years ago. He's put 37 kids through college, kids everyone else had written off. Never once did he ask for recognition. One by one, they stepped forward. A retired teacher spoke of anonymous donations that had supplied her classroom for years. A small business owner described how Arthur's quiet investment had saved his family's restaurant during hard times. Judge Barrett detailed Arthur's decades of contributions to legal aid programs. Arthur stood quietly through it all, his eyes occasionally finding Imani's. She saw something there, regret, perhaps, for his recent absence. Finally, he raised his hand, and the testimonials ceased. I owe everyone here, especially Imani, an explanation for my disappearance these past weeks. He moved closer to where Imani sat with her mother. When the investigation began, I withdrew not out of shame or guilt, but to protect Imani. I knew my presence would only intensify the scrutiny. I hoped that by stepping back, the focus would return to where it belonged, on her character, her actions, her worth as an individual. The scholarship head frowned. But why the initial deception? Why sit in the park, pretending to be forgotten? Arthur finished softly. Because after my wife died, that's exactly what I was. Wealth, position, influence, none of it filled the emptiness. I needed to understand if genuine kindness still existed in a world that increasingly seemed to care only about status and advantage. He turned to face the panel fully. I sat on that bench for 3 months. Hundreds of people passed by. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered and pointed. A few tossed coins, treating generosity like an obligation to be discharged quickly. But only one person, only Imani, offered real human connection. Laverne Brooks reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it tight. She gave me half her lunch every day, Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. Not because she had plenty. I later learned she often went hungry herself. Not because she expected anything in return. She didn't even know my name. She shared what little she had because she saw another human being in need of kindness. Dr. Walker stepped forward again. When Arthur told me about Imani's dream of becoming a nurse, I reviewed her academic record myself. Her grades, her volunteer work, her character. She's exactly the kind of person we desperately need in health care. The opportunities offered to Imani weren't charity or favoritism, Judge Barrett added. They were recognition of merit, the same merit-based opportunities Arthur has been quietly providing to deserving students for decades. The panel members exchanged looks, the weight of the testimony evident in their expressions. The administrator shuffled his papers nervously, clearly reconsidering the entire proceeding. Arthur moved to stand beside Imani's chair. I disappeared from that park bench to test something else, too. Whether the kindness I'd witnessed was genuine or performative. The next day, I watched from my car as Imani arrived with her half sandwich. She waited for nearly an hour. When I didn't show, she left the food carefully wrapped on the bench, just in case I came later. He paused, his voice growing softer. Even after everything fell apart, after the investigation began, after I seemingly abandoned her, she still returned to that park. Not for me this time, but to share what little she had with others who looked lonely or forgotten. That's who Imani Brooks is. That's why she deserves every opportunity I can provide. Imani looked up at Arthur, seeing not the wealthy businessman or the mysterious stranger from the park, but someone who had recognized something in her that she'd never thought special. Her instinct to help, to share, to connect. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she understood. They'd both been searching for something genuine in a world that often felt cold and transactional. In finding each other, they'd found proof that real kindness still existed. The library remained silent, the air charged with unspoken emotion. The panel members sat straight-backed in their chairs, their earlier skepticism replaced by something closer to awe. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Principal Matthews stood at the front of the room, her posture relaxed for the first time since the hearing began. The panel members had returned from their private deliberation, their faces notably softer than before. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, Principal Matthews began, her voice clear and measured. We find no basis for the complaints against Miss Brooks or Mr. Hale. The investigation is officially closed. Laverne Brooks released a shaky breath, grabbing Imani's hand tightly. Imani squeezed back, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Furthermore, the district administrator added, clearing his throat, we owe both Miss Brooks and Mr. Hale an apology for any distress caused by these proceedings. The scholarship and summer medical academy placement are immediately reinstated. A quiet murmur of approval rippled through the assembled witnesses. Dr. Walker smiled warmly at Imani, while Pastor Thompson nodded with satisfaction. Arthur stepped forward, straightening his tie. Thank you for this decision. However, I'd like to propose something more comprehensive. He turned to face the room at large. Recent events have shown us that exceptional character often goes unrecognized. Today, I'm announcing the establishment of the Imani Brooks Educational Trust. Imani's eyes widened. Her mother gasped softly beside her. This trust will go beyond a single scholarship, Arthur continued. It will provide full educational funding through medical school, ensuring that financial constraints never again threaten Imani's dreams of becoming a nurse. He paused, his eyes twinkling. But that's just the beginning. The trust will also launch a broader initiative, the Kindness Recognized program. We'll establish scholarships specifically designed to reward students who demonstrate exceptional character through acts of compassion and service. The principal leaned forward, intrigued. What exactly would this entail? Annual scholarships for students who, like Imani, show consistent kindness without expectation of reward. We'll also fund community outreach programs, free meals in parks, mentorship opportunities, support for struggling families. Arthur smiled at Imani. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness reveal the biggest hearts. Judge Barrett stepped forward. I'd be honored to serve on the selection committee. We need to recognize that academic achievement isn't the only measure of a student's worth. The hospital would be happy to partner in this initiative, Dr. Walker added. We could provide internships, shadowing opportunities, and medical career guidance for scholarship recipients. Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. The Youth Center could help identify deserving candidates. We see everyday heroes like Imani all the time. They just need someone to notice. Laverne Brooks stood slowly, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Hale, I never imagined. She took a deep breath. Thank you for seeing my daughter's heart. Arthur shook his head gently. Your daughter taught me something precious, Mrs. Brooks. She reminded me that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we give. You raised an extraordinary young woman. The district administrator was writing rapidly. We'll need to formalize the program structure, but the board will undoubtedly support this initiative. It aligns perfectly with our goals for character development and community engagement. Principal Matthews smiled broadly. Imani, Would you be willing to help shape this program? Your perspective would be invaluable. Imani stood, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I'd be honored, but could we make sure the scholarships are quiet? Not big ceremonies or public recognition, just help that arrives when it's needed most, like a sandwich shared on a park bench? Arthur finished softly. Absolutely. The room filled with quiet laughter, but it was kind, understanding. The tension that had dominated the space earlier had completely dissolved, replaced by a sense of possibility and hope. Pastor Thompson spoke up. I believe we're witnessing something remarkable here. How one young woman's simple acts of kindness are transforming into a legacy that will lift up countless others. As the adults began discussing logistics and implementation details, Imani felt a strange lightness in her chest. The future that had seemed so uncertain just hours ago was now spreading out before her, full of promise. She thought about other students like her, carrying dreams too heavy for their circumstances, and felt a surge of joy knowing they would find help when they needed it most. Outside the library windows, the afternoon had mellowed into early evening. Students were leaving their after-school activities, their backpacks slung over shoulders, their voices carrying across the campus. Imani watched them, knowing that among them were others who shared whatever they had, who helped without being asked, who chose kindness even when it cost them something. Arthur moved to stand beside her at the window. You know, he said quietly, when I sat on that bench, I was looking for proof that genuine goodness still existed in the world. You didn't just prove it to me. You've helped create a way to nurture it in others. Laverne joined them, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. She looked years younger, as if a great weight had lifted from her too. The worry lines that usually creased her forehead had softened. Baby, she whispered to Imani, I always knew you were special. But watching you stay true to yourself through all this, that's what makes me proudest. Through the windows, they could see the school grounds bathed in warm, golden light. The same view Imani had seen every day for years, but now it looked different. Not because anything had physically changed, but because she could finally see her place in it clearly. She was no longer the girl who hoped for a chance at her dreams. She was becoming the woman who would help others reach theirs. The seasons turned like pages in a well-loved book. 5 years passed, marked by graduations, celebrations, and countless quiet moments of triumph. Spring flowers bloomed and faded. Summer heat shimmered over concrete. Autumn painted the park trees in brilliant colors. And winter brought its blanket of stillness, again and again, until the girl who once divided her sandwich had grown into a woman in crisp blue scrubs. Imani Brooks adjusted her ID badge as she walked through the familiar gates of Memorial Park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across newly installed benches and carefully tended garden beds. What had once been a simple stretch of grass now flourished as a community gathering space. Food carts offered free meals 3 times a week, their cheerful awnings providing shade for casual mentorship meetings. Medical students from the university hosted regular health screenings under the pavilion that Arthur had funded. She paused to greet Mrs. Thompson, who managed the community library cart, another addition that transformed the park into more than just a passing-through place. Good shift today, Imani? Busy, but good, Imani replied, smiling. 2 of our scholarship students shadowed me in the pediatric ward. They're going to make wonderful nurses. The Kindness Recognized program had grown beyond anyone's initial vision. What started as a single scholarship had bloomed into a comprehensive support system, identifying and nurturing young people who showed that same spirit of giving that Imani had demonstrated years ago. The program didn't just provide financial aid. It created a network of mentors, opportunities, and resources that wrapped around each recipient like a warm embrace. Imani's feet carried her along the winding path she'd walked countless times before. The old bench, the one where everything began, remained in its original spot, though it had been restored and reinforced. Arthur had insisted on keeping it, understanding its significance as the heart of their shared story. She sat down, smoothing her scrubs, and let the familiar peace of the place wash over her. The memory of that first shared sandwich felt both distant and immediate, like a photograph that had softened around the edges but retained its essential truth. She thought of Arthur, now in his 80s but still sharp as ever, attending every scholarship selection meeting and insisting on meeting each recipient personally. From her vantage point, she could see the impact of those years of quiet persistence. A group of teens worked on homework at the study tables, sharing snacks and encouragement. Two elderly gentlemen played chess on one of the permanent stone tables, their laughter carrying on the breeze. A mother watched her children on the new playground equipment, installed last summer after the community fundraiser. The park had become what Arthur called a kindness hub, a place where help was given freely and dignity was preserved carefully. The program maintained its commitment to quiet assistance, avoiding grand gestures in favor of meeting needs simply and directly. Just last week, they'd helped a struggling student get new glasses without any fuss or fanfare. Yesterday, a young man received bus passes that would let him attend college classes while caring for his younger siblings. Imani pulled her lunch bag onto her lap, a habit she'd never quite broken. Even now, with a steady job and financial security, she often packed extra food, not out of obligation, but because she remembered the power of shared meals, the way food could bridge gaps and open hearts. A movement caught her eye, a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, hovering near the path. She wore clothes that spoke of careful mending and shoes that had seen better days. In her hands, she clutched a small paper bag, creased from being held too tightly. Her eyes darted between the bench and the ground, that familiar dance of wanting to help but fearing rejection. The scene overlaid perfectly with Imani's memories. She could almost see her younger self standing there, caught in that same moment of decision. The weight of that choice, the trembling possibility of connection, the risk of reaching out when you had so little to give. The girl took a half step forward, then back, her knuckles white around her lunch bag. She had the same look Imani had seen countless times in the mirror years ago, that mixture of determination and uncertainty, of wanting to help even when help seemed too small to matter. Imani felt the full circle of the moment, the perfect symmetry of time and choice and consequence. She thought of all the lives touched by that first simple decision to share, all the ripples that had spread outward from that single act of kindness. She remembered Arthur's words about genuine goodness and how it multiplied when recognized and nurtured. The afternoon light softened, casting a gentle glow over the park. A light breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the community garden. Around them, the steady hum of conversation and laughter created a warm backdrop of human connection. Imani smiled, feeling the weight of this pivotal moment. She turned slightly on the bench, making space beside her, and looked at the hesitating girl with gentle understanding in her eyes. Everything that had grown from her own childhood choice, the trust, the program, the transformed lives, seemed to pause, waiting for another cycle to begin. She caught the girl's uncertain gaze and offered the same kind of invitation that had once changed her own life. Would you like to sit with me? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.